Hello and welcome to the myMix webinar, How to Feed Your Musicians a Well-Balanced Diet, or What Signals to Send for a Personal Monitor Mix. My name is Christian Glück and I'm Product Manager for myMix. Before we take a look to the individual signals, let's take a look to the mixes themselves. The main mix and a personal monitor mix. There are big differences and it starts with a signal chain that's completely different for both of them. So there is no PA and there is no room involved in the signal chain. The next big differences are the targets of these mixes. The third difference is the person that is mixing. On one side we have a performing musician. So during the performance the focus is fully on the right brain side, which features the creativity and musicality. To choose which signals to send to the musicians for their mix, it is very important to understand the musicians. They are on stage to perform, not to mix. And most of the musicians, about 80 to 90%, are not sound engineers. Some of them are even afraid of mixing consoles. So, what signals should be used? Now first, every musician has to hear the own instrument or own voice. That's very important to control the individual performance. In addition, most musicians would also want to hear everything else as well, but not as a pack of all individual channels. Looking at too many channels can easily become overwhelming. So our recipe for the perfect diet is to have the individual channels plus dedicated submixes. That way all the musicians can get what they want, but without losing the overview. Let's take a look at an example. So we have a 5-piece band here. 2 of the musicians are singing. We got 2 additional vocal microphones and 1 solo microphone. So it's a total of 18 channels for the house console, and from there we are feeding 16 channels to an input expander. Now let's see how this translates to the channels for the personal monitor mixing system. We have kick and snare directly from the console, and then a submix of the rest of the drum kit, so hi-hat, the tom mics and the overheads get together in a stereo mix to the input expander. We also create a stereo submix of all the vocal microphones. Bass, electric guitar, acoustic guitar, the solo mic, the keys, and the other vocal microphones are fed directly to the myMix system. For his click, the drummer is using the local input of his myMix on stage. That allows the drummer to pick the kick snare, the submix of the drums. Because the drummer is not singing, he's picking the submix of the vocals and then the other instruments plus his click. The bass player selects the same drum channels, but because he's singing himself, rather than taking the submix, he's picking all the vocal mics individually. Very similar for a vocalist, also picking the drum channels, and in addition to the instruments, the individual vocal microphones. One of the big advantages of myMix is the virtually unlimited channel count on the network. So even with larger groups and setups, still everybody can have the own instrument or voice as an individual channel available for the personal monitor mix. But how can you take advantage of that if your console has only 16 outputs that you're already feeding to an input expander? Now that's where the local inputs of the myMix come to play. With every myMix on stage you have 2 inputs into the network system. And signals coming from a DI box, you can use the link through and put it into a myMix. So that's basically a split of a signal that comes for free. If you have a microphone signal that you want to split, you can simply add a mic split box and split that signal, one for myMix and the other one for the main console. If you got many channels that you would like to split in addition, Then we recommend the Clark Technique Square One splitter. It's a combination of a splitter with built-in microphone preamps. So these signals you feed into an input expander, and that gives you basically as many individual channels as you want to have in your personal monitor mixing system. So let's take a look now into example 1, but now with more channels. In addition to the kick and the snare microphone, we use a split box for the hi-hat, direct outs for the 2 overheads, and we create a stereo submix for the 3 tom mics. For the other instruments and microphones, we use the direct out as before, and we have a submix of the whole drums and all the vocals as before. That allows the drummer now to pick a kick snare, hi-hat, the submix of the 3 toms and the 2 overheads individually as microphones, plus the other instruments. He's also selecting, because he's not singing, a submix of the vocals, so he makes a very good use of the 16 channels on his screen. The bass player doesn't want all that many microphones from the drum kit, so he takes the submix of the drums and just adding kick and snare in addition. He's selecting on the other instruments plus a submix of the vocals. A vocalist on stage would pick the individual vocal microphones, but therefore just a submix of the drums, ending up with 12 channels to control. And the keyboarder, who's not singing himself, he just picks a submix of the drums and the vocals, ending up with only 10 channels to control his mix individually. So don't forget about the locals inputs of your myMix systems, because if you have 8 myMixes on stage, these are 16 more inputs to your system for free. A quick note here to the signals coming from the mixing consoles. Console direct outputs can be processed or unprocessed. Now, depending on the console that you're using, you might have more or less options. In some cases, you do have the options to pick the signal where you want in your signal flow diagram. The preferred signal to feed for a personal monitor mix is always without processing, because the processing you apply on the console, that's applied for the main mix. And if you recall, the signal chain is very, very different. The main mix is heard through the speakers in the room. The monitor mix on stage is going through the personal monitor mixer and the earplugs straight to the ear. So whatever you apply as far as dynamics and equalizers might actually not help. In some cases, it might be even counterproductive to what you want to achieve in monitors. Now let's take a look at example number 2, where we have a larger band, actually a small orchestra, plus a choir and solo microphones. We have a full drum kit, electric guitars, acoustic guitars, 2 keys, a piano, 4 solo microphones, a choir with 8 individual mics, a string section, saxophones, trombone, trumpet, and 2 playback. So if you throw in a few effects channel, the engineer might be dealing with about 50 channels for the house mix. So how does this translate to the monitor system? So we take the most important microphones from the drums plus all other individual channels. So every violin, every vocal microphone is fed as an individual channel for the myMix system. In addition, we create dedicated submixes. So there is a drum kit. These are the remaining microphones from the drums. Then there is a rhythm section. The rhythm section actually contains the whole drums, bass, and all the guitars. For people that don't play an instrument, we create actually a stereo submix of the entire band. If you're not playing an instrument, why would you want to control all these instruments individually? And then we have the strings, the brass wood sections, a group of all the solo mics, the choir, a mix called foldback, so that could be used to bring in the playback and also some additional sources, talkback or whatsoever, guitar, keys, and finally the drums. This layout of the submixes might look a little bit complex, but you will see very soon when you look at the individual selections why we've made it like that. The drummer can pick all the individual drum mics plus the submix of his kit, so he has full control about all these things in detail, where everything else he's just selecting the submix. If we look at a violinist, this looks completely different. So, violinists picking all the individual string microphones because they have a meaning and might be very useful in adjusting them individually. In addition to that, he picks the rhythm group because there is no need to have all these instruments and guitars individually. So just a stereo mix of that is just perfect. Adding the brass, the solo mics, choir, the foldback channel and the keys make that selection complete. Now let's take a look at one person of the choir. They can pick all the individual choir microphones and adjust them individually as they like them. Now, because they are not playing any instrument, this is where the submix band comes to play. They add the solo mics and the foldback channel, and that's all they need to have to control their individual mix. Very similar with the solo microphones. So they can pick all the solo mics individually and adjust them individually, but the same as in the choir, the band is just a stereo channel plus the choir and the foldback. So they are looking at just 7 channels on the screen. Very easy and straightforward to control. If we look at a pianist, he can pick the 2 individual keyboards, the own piano, and takes all the other instruments as individual submixes. The bass player, however, he might want to have the same detail on the drums as the drummer, and he also has the choice to select the click. So overall you can see detail of control where it is needed and it makes sense for the individual musician, everything else consolidated in dedicated submixes. Now, what if the drummer wants to create the drum mix submix himself? That's pretty easy with myMix, because he can take one myMix and select all the drum channels, create the mix using level, pan and stereo effects, and sending that mix to the network as the stereo submix drums. So that submix is available on the network as a stereo signal for every other myMix to pick. So the drummer takes a second myMix, bringing in that stereo mix, plus adding all the other individual microphones that he wants to have under control for his mix. In this instance, it's using 9 drum mics and 12 other mics, so a total of 21. Using 2 myMixes, one can control actually up to 30 channels individually. But that's not for the average musician, as I said in the beginning. That's really for the people that work as engineer and just want to get all the details and control them themselves. Now let me add a quick comment about ambient microphones and their use in concert. Ambient mics can be good to capture the feedback from the audience. But because they are placed to capture the audience, they will also capture the PA. And that requires them to be driven by a sound engineer. So when the band's playing, they need to be down. When the band's not playing, they need to be brought up. It would be actually ideal having the ambient microphones, if they are needed, and fed them through the foldback mix. That's a channel that can be used for all the other additional channels that might be interesting for the musicians on stage. So, thank you very much for joining us in this webinar. There's more information and other webinars you'll find on mymixaudio.com/webinars. And if you got any questions or comments, feel free to send an email to carl@moviecorp.com. Thanks again for your attention and hope to see you soon.